The Philippine Revolution, an important historical event that few people actually know about. A battle between Spain and the Philippines for Filipino independence, lasting for 2 years, from 1896 to 1898. Why did the people start the revolution? Is what I asked when I originally had no idea what it was about. I will still go into this, but after some research, I realized this was not as purposeful. I think we need a nationalistic hero to focus on. So, my new inquiry question is, why was José Rizal an important figure in the Philippine Revolution? Basically, what impact did he have on the Filipinos, and what did he contribute to the revolution? Wait a sec, who even is he? José Rizal, also known as José Protasio Rizal Mercado y Alonso Rilanda, was born on June 19, 1861 in Calamba, Philippines. He was an educated middle-class Filipino, a patriot, physician, and was famous for contributing a lot to the first two Philippine nationalistic groups. But why did they need to start them? Why did the revolution even happen? Let's rewind. The Filipinos developed their own unique culture until 1521. Ferdinand Magellan was an explorer trying to sail around the world. Now Spain and the Spaniards were looking to expand their territory and discover more land. So they sponsored Magellan, who came to the Philippines to claim the land to Spain. After that, Spain ruled over the Philippines for over 300 years. During this time, the Filipinos were unhappy. The Spanish had brought diseases like smallpox and leprosy. The Spanish took over large belts of land previously owned by native groups for centuries before. Native Filipinos lived on Spanish-owned land and became tenants or paid laborers. The Spanish made sure to get rid of the Filipino traditions and customs, calling them works of the devil. Spanish religious orders took control of the people's lives and alienated a lot of Filipinos. They were not allowed to choose a religion under Spain's rule. The Filipinos mainly had contact with the Spanish through the Catholic Church. The government and laws made in Spain were unfair. They did not have the rights that they deserved. There were no laws that enforced protection for them. They didn't have any access to public education until 1863, where there was the first ever educational system in the Philippines. But even then, the schools were run by the Catholic Church. After that, there were a lot more educated Filipinos who could even study in Spanish and European university. Even though this education problem was more resolved after, let's be honest, way too long, Filipinos still lacked a lot of rights. But there was one incident, one breaking point, which sent Filipinos over the edge and got them to take action. This is known as Gumboza. In 1872, 3 Filipino priests, Mariano Gomez, Jose Burgos, and Jacinta Zamora, were executed, accused of sedition. Supposedly, they had led Cavite Mutiny, which was a quick uprising of just 200 nationalistic Filipino troops and workers, but this was quickly crushed. This will teach them not to mess with us Spaniards. Take this as a warning. What? I'm beginning to question these Spanish authorities. There needs to be changes. It awakens the concept of nationalism among them. They realized just how problematic the Spanish rule had become. So, what did the people do? They started the first ever Filipino nationalistic movement called Kilusang Propaganda, a movement started by middle-class educated people called Ilustrados, including Graciano Lopez Shaina, Mariano Ponce, Marcelo H. del Pilar, and the most prominent and most important member, José Rizal. But what change did they want? The propaganda movement, more than anything, wanted equality. So, a change they tried to make was making the Philippines a province of Spain in order to be equal to the Spanish. They also wanted basic rights, like freedom of speech. They also tried to have Philippine representation in the Cortes, which is the Spanish parliament. They tried to make these changes through writing. So, in 1888, Graciano, the journalist, started a newspaper called La Solidaridad. This is where they wrote those changes and reforms down. And this is where our hero comes in, who wrote so much for La Solidaridad. José Rizal. He was one of the biggest contributors. He also wrote 2 political novels with a huge impact on the Philippines. He showed how the Philippines had its own culture and history before Spain ruled over. So how did the government respond? No, they did not agree with the demands written in La Solidaridad. They didn't have the will to listen to the people, and they had their own problems going on then, so they didn't have the time to listen to the people either. Because the people in it were ilustrados, they also prioritized their wealth instead of this movement. This, along with quarrels, differences, and lack of funds, eventually led this movement to fall. The Filipinos were not done yet, though. In fact, there was one man, one person who would not stop. He would keep on persevering for his country. Even though all the members of the movement split, there was one figure who remained. This was José Rizal. That's right, he just kept going. So, on July 3rd, 1892, José Rizal formed La Liga Filipina. This movement had the same objective as the propaganda movement. They planned to unite the whole country, have mutual protection in every want and necessity, fight against violence and injustice, develop the education system so that it's not just run by church, and study and implement reforms. They were a non-violent group, which did not even mention Philippine independence. But Spain was afraid and felt threatened. So they captured José Rizal on the 6th of July, 1892, only 3 days after it started. He was exiled and deported to Dapitan for 4 years. So La Liga Filipina also fell apart. Still, one of the group members did not quit. This was André Bonifacio. The next day, on July 7th, Bonifacio formed a secret organization called the Katastasang Kagalang-Galanggang Katipunan ng mga anak ng bayan, or just Katipunan for short. This is their flag, and please do not confuse this with the white supremacist group, the Ku Klux Klan, because the Katipunan is a very different group. A lot of activists from La Liga Filipina formed into this group. But this time, it was different. The Filipinos had already tried peaceful demonstrations through writing and asking for reforms. So this time, they were gonna overthrow the Spanish through battle with the support of military, and they were going to demand independence. The members were just ordinary people. Most of them were just lower class and middle class people. But what change did they want? Instead of wanting to become a province of Spain like before, the Katipunan wanted to gain complete freedom and independence as a country from Spain. With war. With revolution. Even though Rizal wasn't part of this group, he was still very inspiring and looked up to as a leader by the members. Rizal was even used as a password among the higher ranking members called Bayani. Bonifacio, who started it all, respected Rizal and his intelligence, and even asked Dr. Pio Valenzuela to seek Rizal's advice on the revolution. One piece of advice that Rizal gave was to gather more weapons, and so that's what the Katipunan did. The Katipunan had a printing press and published a newspaper called the Kalayaan, which translates to freedom. The Katipunan grew slowly at first, but after January 18th, 1896, when Kalayaan was published, this group grew a lot more quickly, and estimates have varied from maybe 30, maybe 40,000 to 400,000 people. A male member of this group was called a Katipunero, and a female member was called a Katipunera. The Katipuneros were trained as military force. The Katipunan remained a secret for years, though some rumors spread that they existed, but there was no solid evidence. But on August 19th, 1896, one member, Teodoro Pantino, told his sister, Honoria, about it. Honoria was so upset by it that she told the orphanage that she worked in Spanish Mother Superior, who told the priest Mariano Hill. He was the parish priest of Tondo, so he told the authorities. From this, Mariano searched with Spanish civil guards. The governor general soon found out, and so the government arrested hundreds of suspected Katipunan members. News spread about this like wildfire, so Andre Bonifacio called an emergency general meeting. They have figured us out, so we need to start soon before they capture more of us. Are you willing to fight to the bitter end? Yes! Alright then, let's start the revolution. And so the Philippine Revolution began on August 23rd, 1896. Now tear your residential certificates. This will be known as the cry of Pugadlawing. The Katipunan members ripped their cedulas, which are their residential certificates, into shreds. It showed them defying the Spaniards and their determination to have an independent country, as they shouted, "Long live the Philippines!" From then on, they battled. It was an armed attack military battle between Filipinos and Spanish colonial authorities. On August 29th, Bonifacio organized an attack on the country's capital, Manila. The Spanish responded by retaliating and outnumbering the Katipunan, forcing them to go back and retreat to the hills. The armed struggle began in Manila, but spread to provinces around Manila and all around the Philippines. Cavite eventually became the center of it all. But on December 30th, 1896, José Rizal was publicly executed, falsely accused of sedition. Many Filipinos were shocked and affected by his death. But this inspired the Filipinos to keep fighting for their country and gain back control over the Philippines. In fact, today Filipinos remember his death and his sacrifice for the Philippines, known as the Rizal Day. More battles happened, but Bonifacio lost all the battles he led, because while he was a good leader, his main strategy was just attack! But another Katipunan member, Emilio Aguinaldo, led battles and all of them succeeded. So, the Katipunan split into two groups, Magdiwan, led by Bonifacio, and Magdalo, led by Aguinaldo. Naturally, the Katipuneros began to question the leadership. So, there was some internal conflict between the two groups. So, on March 22nd, 1897, there was a convention called Tejeros Convention. The group decided to create a revolutionary government. So, they would have an election to establish who should be the officers and leaders. Emilio Aguinaldo won, becoming the president. And Andrés Bonifacio was demoted from being the highest ranking member of the Katipunan, the Supremo, to the lowest ranking member in this government, being the Director of Interior. And he was about to accept it. But there was this guy, Daniel Torona, who said, "Wait, the Director of Interior is supposed to be a lawyer. And Andrés Bonifacio didn't even go to high school. He's so uneducated." Actually, Andrés Bonifacio was very smart. His dad just died early, so he had to work early and provide for his family. So he shouldn't even be in this position. Andrés Bonifacio got so mad that he took out his gun, aimed at Terono, and shot and missed. He missed! And so that was very humiliating for him. So he stomped out and started his own rival government. Aguinaldo realized that they were fighting each other instead of the Spaniards. So he got officers to arrest Bonifacio on April 27th, and sadly he was executed on May 10th, 1897, found guilty of treason by the War Council. On December of 1897, a truce was made with the Spanish. This was called Biak na Bato. Emilio Aguinaldo, who was now the mayor and commander of the Katipunan, signed a treaty and was paid a lot to surrender their weapons, and for him to accept exile in Hong Kong. The Spanish promised reforms as well. But these reforms took a while. They came in slow. Because of the distrust people had in the Spanish and their promises, small bands of rebels came and clashes happened more often. Both sides did not fully do what they promised in the treaty. In Hong Kong, Aguinaldo kept purchasing weapons, and the Spanish revoked their promised reforms. The battle continued, and eventually 8 provinces were freed from the Spanish civil guards. The US had a battle with Spain at the time and joined forces with the Filipinos. And on June 12, 1898, Philippine independence was declared! After the revolution, life was different, but not in the way you'd expect. America assumed control over the Philippines after Spain had been defeated. Because of this, the Philippines had more American culture than it did, say, under the Spanish rule. The government was also different following the revolution. Instead of a colonial government, the US established a military government. Since it was unfair for the US to just take over, Emilio Aguinaldo created another rival government. After lots of battling, the US allowed the Philippines to have a limited self-government, and they replaced the US military government with a civilian government. These types of governments emerged because the Philippines didn't have to worry about Spain's rule anymore, but rather the US rule or government. Back to my inquiry question, why is José Rizal an important figure in the Philippine Revolution? José is the man who started it all, who contributed so much to the first 2 nationalistic groups, and called out Spain for its colonial government flaws by writing in the newspaper La Solidaridad, and wrote 2 amazing novels promoting nationalism and showing how power is when people unite to change injustice and give voices to the ones who experience it. He started La Liga Filipina, which led to the members of that group taking on the job to have Philippine rights, even after he was exiled and deported to Dapitan. And while he did not start the Katipunan, the group who fought in the revolution, he inspired the founder Andres Bonifacio. Bonifacio and all the Katipuneros looked up to him a lot as a great leader. His name was even used as a secret password. And his death and sacrifice for his country inspired a lot of Filipinos to fight in the Katipunan for their country. He was truly an inspiration to so many Filipinos, and the Philippine Revolution couldn't have happened without him. And while the country still had battles to come, the Philippine Revolution was still such an important time in history. In fact, the cry of Pugalawin, which was at the start of the Philippine Revolution, actually influenced our Philippines flag today. As you can see, there are 8 points on the flag. When Andre Bonifacio started the revolution and said that it was time to attack the Spaniards, these 8 points represent the 8 provinces that immediately responded to Bonifacio's calls. The Philippine Revolution also introduced and awakened nationalism with the Filipinos, and for more generations of Filipinos to come. It showed how, with a common goal, the Filipinos can unite. It showed how dedicated Filipinos with a strong love for the country and determination can rise against authority, even if it seems so daunting. José Rizal is a nationalistic hero who would change people's lives, not just in the short term, but he created a long-lasting change. Not only was he an important figure in the Philippine Revolution, but he is still important today, inspiring many generations of Filipinos with his leadership and intelligence. He fought in a quiet way, with just pen and paper, yet it was extremely powerful. Some may say his pen was mightier than the sword. His love for his country couldn't have been greater. José Rizal is truly a hero.